Jett found his calling for the first time while listening to the sigh of reclaimed lumber and the creaking rafters of old houses. He was born in the country of West Virginia and spent his childhood pulling bark off of hickory logs next to his grandfather's barn. By the time he was 10, he knew the basics of joinery and loved playing with old, rusty tools that told stories. Johnny loved the smell of sawdust and the thrill of finding wood that had been left behind in mountain homes when the coal boom ended. Other boys his age were crazy about video games. In the summers when he was a teenager, he would walk around old logging camps with a notebook in hand, drawing plans for rebuilding fallen houses and measuring the lengths of planks. He thought that every splinter and worn-down board told a story that he wanted to keep and share. After high school, Johnny went to a small college in Virginia to study architecture. He dropped out when he learned that he was more interested in the real world of salvage than in blueprints and theory. He learned how to tell the difference between heart pine and poplar by its weight and grain, how to use his fingers to find hidden nails, and how to use measured steam to bring warped floorboards back into line. Landowners heard about him and started to contact him when they wanted to save old barns from being torn down and dumped instead of letting them be destroyed. In 2015, a director looking for restoration talent for a new DIY network show asked Johnny to join Barnwood Builders. The show made him famous overnight, going from being a local woodworker to being known all over the country. On screen, Johnny's quiet determination stood out against Mark Bowe, his co-host, who was very animated. Johnny was more interested in the joints and nails than Mark, who joked and teased. He often took long close-ups of his precise tenon cuts or the pleasing click of reclaimed flooring locking into place. People liked how well he worked and how humble he was, so he became known as the show's regular wood whisperer. He helped take down log cabins every season, carefully listing each piece of wood before bringing it to his workshop. His changes showed that old wood had pin knots and sap streaks that made each beam unique after the paint and rot were scraped off. Fans learned to recognize shiplap profiles and the fine curves of hand-hewn timbers that only Johnny could find. Then, in the winter of 2018, reports started to spread. An old friend wrote on social media that Johnny had quit Barnwood Builders, but they didn't say why. When viewers checked in every week, they looked for his familiar figure in his signature knit caps and tool belt, but a guest carpenter took his place. There was no formal statement that said why the series' most careful craftsman had stepped down. A lot of people on online groups had wild guesses. Was it creative burnout? A fight with the directors over changes made on camera? Or maybe something more personal came up that made him have to go back to West Virginia. In the background, a different story was slowly taking shape. There were reports of rising tensions over Johnny's part in making design choices. Producers of episodic dramas often cut Johnny's careful restoration process out in favor of faster reveal scenes because they want to make shows run more smoothly. He didn't like how some steps were cut short, like the month-long curing of milled posts or the exact alignment of dovetail joints. He thought that watchers should see the whole story of how each piece of wood changed. Insiders say that family-run production problems hit a breaking point when an important episode about restoring a 200-year-old farmhouse aired without important milling parts. Johnny allegedly went up to the executive producers and insisted on having artistic control. He was told that reality TV meant making some concessions. But the situation was more complicated than just arguments on set. At the same time, Johnny's wife was having a major health problem that required him to be at home. Long shoots on site and stays in the hospital were not possible at the same time. At first, the producers gave him a short break and said he would be back in a minor role once things got back to normal. As the months went by, though, the storyline of the season turned to other characters. Johnny was offered a job teaching advanced timber framing classes at a nearby community college. This would allow him to guide trainees in the same way that he had been guided by teachers. It seemed like he had to make this choice. He wanted to go back to hands-on learning, away from the bright lights of TV, where he could balance family and art without having to make calls all the time. Fans were sad that Johnny wasn't there, but his exit wasn't a disappearance, it was an evolution. He started his own YouTube page where he shares in-depth workshops on how to choose lumber, fix up barn doors, and build post and beam sheds that are good for the environment. More and more people signed up for his show because he was ready to go into joinery details that network TV rarely let them. At the same time, he worked as a consultant on business restorations, such as turning old grist mills into community centers and old schoolhouses into event spaces. He did all of this while still video chatting with former Barnwood co-workers to share stories. Insiders say he left with respect for the team and thanks for the platform that brought rustic reclamation to millions of people, even though he never complained about Barnwood Builders in public. So what did Johnny Jett really do? He gave up the restrictions of serial TV to teach, try new things, and focus on what first inspired him: the satisfying scrape of old barn planks, the careful scribing of mortises, and the joy of teaching others the skills he had worked so hard to learn. He still takes care of old trees, but now his students learn at their own pace, one detailed lesson, one reclaimed beam, and one patient joint at a time. When Johnny got rid of the network cameras, his workshop turned into a creative lab where he could try out all of his ideas without having to worry about how long each episode had to run. He bought an old grain silo close to his home and turned its round shape into a 2,500 square foot woodworking workshop. Inside those corrugated steel walls, he put together a collection of old machines, including a power saw from the 1940s that he had fixed up, a jointer from the 1970s that he had saved from a closed mill, and a special dual-head planer that a local craftsman had built. He named it the Silo Lab and asked apprentices from the area to work for him. People quickly learned that this wasn't a TV show, but a real mentorship program based on the same values that Johnny had learned from his grandpa. His YouTube site, Timber Revival, became a way for Barnwood Builders fans to learn more about his deep-dive teaching style. Johnny posted episodes every week that showed the whole repair process, from removing layers of lead paint to micro-milling tongue-and-groove boards from reclaimed wood, without cutting for TV drama. Subscribers liked how the episodes moved slowly and honestly were narrated. They saw every plane line and chisel nick and knew that patience, not showmanship, is what makes craftsmanship last. One comment said, "I never thought I'd watch an hour on mortise and tenon joinery, but Johnny makes it riveting." This unexpected emotion showed the desire for authenticity, showing that fans wanted real shows over sensational ones. Besides giving lessons, he also held classes for the public on how to preserve history. Johnny led groups of volunteers at a yearly barn rescue event to carefully take apart a 150-year-old tobacco barn that was going to be torn down. People from nearby states came to work with old nails and crooked boards, and they kept personal journals of each step. They learned how to number the timbers, make splice covers for broken posts, and store things correctly during humid times with his help. When the barn's frame was finally put up in a pavilion made from recycled pine at the local farmers market, the people who had worked hard that weekend took home more than just wood. They also took home a lesson in how to be a good steward. At the same time, Johnny was in charge of the Barnwood Heritage Trust, a non-profit he had quietly started the year after leaving TV. Through funding and volunteer work, the trust tries to save barns in Appalachia that are in danger of being destroyed. It worked with colleges, historical societies, and land trusts. Dozens of buildings that were in danger of falling down were saved and turned into community centers, art galleries, or educational places under his direction. In one case, the trust fixed up a log house that belonged to a pioneering female doctor and turned it into a museum of rural health. Johnny's work was praised on the front pages of local newspapers, which called him Appalachia's timber guardian. His impact in the region was stronger than ever, even though he wasn't as well known on TV. Of course, leaving Barnwood Builders meant taking risks with money. TV contracts pay 6 figures per season, but nonprofits that raised their own money did not. Johnny had to make a tough choice: should he grow the trust or keep his training program that doesn't charge fees? Invest in studio tools or set aside money to reach out to rural communities? He chose a leaner living instead of putting fame ahead of his values. He got rid of some power tools that he didn't use very often, moved from a house in the suburbs to a renovated cabin built on old wood pilings, and promised to earn every inch of workspace. People who followed him saw in his thrifty ways an honest craftsman who wasn't afraid to live by his beliefs. His honest talks about managing cash flow and making budgets for projects became a surprising but popular series on his channel. This shows that being open about money can build trust. Later that year, in late 2019, he got an unexpected letter from Barnwood Builders producer. They were making a special anniversary episode and wanted Johnny to come back as a guest to talk about how his restoration skills have changed since the beginning of the show. The creative banners that came with the offer said that he could direct, get credit as a co-producer, and write his own segments. The news caused a huge stir on social media. "Bring back Johnny," yelled the fans. And deathmatch, studio versus silo lab. But Johnny's answer surprised a lot of people. He said no. He was grateful for the offer, but he said that his work needed consistency, not nostalgia. It felt like going backwards to switch from one kind of show-driven agreement to another. Instead, he suggested that they send a camera crew to film how his silo lab works and then make an independent special that shows both points of view, connecting his TV world with his independent world. Johnny's counteroffer showed that he was willing to work with others without giving up his new way of doing repair. PBS picked up his idea in early 2021. The documentary that came out of it, Barnwood Builders, Roots and Rebellion, put together quick 10-minute time-lapses from the network show with a full day at his silo lab to show how careful study and methodical work can reveal secret structural integrity in old beams. People saw contrast framing at its best, packaged entertainment versus unfiltered research. There was a huge response. Lifelong fans wrote letters. The PBS special Barnwood Builders, Roots and Rebellion was a huge hit. Viewers loved how different it was from TV's staged highlights and Johnny's silo lab's natural rhythms. A lot of letters came into his office thanking him for finally revealing the hard work that went into each reclaimed beam. Historians praised the documentary for keeping important restoration information that is often lost in quick cuts. Fans who first saw Johnny on network TV were thrilled to see him back in a format that respected his commitment to authenticity and depth. Within days of the show's launch, subscriptions to Timber Revival went through the roof. Fans of the show and people who were just becoming interested flocked to watch longer clips from the silo lab. Johnny's comments on where the wood came from and how to test for moisture gave viewers rare glimpses into the subtleties of timber building. Brands that make sustainable building materials wanted to work with him because they were impressed by how methodical he was and how faithful his followers were. Most of the offers that seemed too businesslike he turned down, but he did agree to help with the design of a limited edition set of hand tools made by a tradition toolmaker in Pennsylvania. Pretty soon, he was being asked to talk at woodworking festivals and preservation symposiums all over North America. Johnny gave keynote speeches that mixed personal stories with technical demonstrations. These talks showed why timber framing is both an art and a science. The art is listening to the wood's past, and the science is building structures. His presence changed the focus of these events from nostalgia to practical skill building, which made people think about how they salvage things in their own communities. Organizers said that people had to wait months to get into his classes, which shows that he was more influential than just a TV face. At the same time, Johnny led the Barnwood Heritage Trust to grow. He set up regional branches in states ranging from Kentucky to Maine and asked volunteers and experts to look at buildings that might be in danger. One important job was fixing up a tobacco drying barn from the Civil War in rural Virginia. Apprentices carefully replaced damaged rafters with beams milled on site from salvaged oak trees with the trust's help. They then wrote about the process in books that were sent to local schools as lessons. People in the community often thanked Johnny for keeping a physical record of their shared history for future generations. It was more important than ever for Johnny's family to help him at home. On the weekends, he started going to the silo lab with his wife Jenny and their 2 kids to help sort used nails and pack small samples for mill tests. The fact that kids were proudly wearing little tool belts made his goal more cross-generational. His personal life used to be tense because of his network shooting plans, but the new rhythm gave him more stability in his hours and let him enjoy family dinners around the farmhouse table he built himself. He would often work late into the night recording voiceovers for his digital series and typing up plans for a new book that might be called Reclaimed Wisdom, A Guide to Timber Heritage. The manuscript has step-by-step instructions and stories about barns that have changed rural towns for hundreds of years. Publishing offers came in from specialized presses that were interested in his honest stories and meticulous work. Johnny wants the book to become a standard resource for both beginners and experts who want to make sure that the skills he shows online live on in print. Johnny still believes that protecting the environment is very important. He writes and talks a lot about how reusing old wood instead of cutting new wood can help lower carbon emissions by making things last longer. In pieces for green building magazines, he compares the long-term benefits of adaptive reuse versus new construction. For example, he looks at the energy costs of demolition waste versus the energy that is already in beams that are hundreds of years old. His well-thought-out, data-based arguments have shaped policy discussions in a number of local planning bodies. Johnny wants to turn an old cloth mill in his hometown into a public timber arts museum and training center in the future. He is in talks to get the site funds and recognition as a historic landmark. The planned museum will have rotating tool displays, salvaged buildings, and hands-on workshops for both kids and adults. Along with the physical space, there will be a digital archive with video tutorials, oral histories, and 3D scans of old joinery methods that anyone in the world can access. What actually happened to Johnny Jett can be summed up as a change from being a TV craftsman to a keeper of wood tradition. He has made sure that the lessons and methods behind reclaimed wood will last long after any broadcast season by using independent platforms, teaching directly at his own pace, and starting groups that help him do more. Johnny's true legacy is a living network of students who keep the art of wood restoration alive. This is being done by apprentices, historians, and do-it-yourself fans who follow his standards of patience, precision, and deep respect for the material world. Many people are inspired by one craftsman's desire to start a movement of mindful restoration. After the PBS special confirmed Johnny's dedication to depth over drama, he was soon sought after by mainstream media, and not just in woodshops. Discovery Channel asked him to be the host of a limited series called Beyond the Barn. In it, he would go around the world to save traditional buildings like Swedish wood barns and Japanese kara storehouses. The offer came with a six-figure salary, the freedom to be creative, and credit as a producer. But when shooting started in early 2022, Johnny faced a familiar problem. His desire to slow down for careful restoration often clashed with production schedules that called for big surprises. During a shoot in the countryside of Sweden, he wouldn't skip the week-long kiln drying process that made sure the recycled beams wouldn't bend in the hot weather. Executives said they would cut the segment, but the team rallied behind him, saying that the only thing that really made the show special was how real it was. Johnny understood at that moment that his influence went far beyond his own projects. He was changing the whole way restoration TV is done around the world. At home, this newfound fame meant more obligations. Many critics gave the first season of Beyond the Barn high marks, and soon he was getting requests from historic preservation boards all over North America and Europe. He spoke in front of congressional committees in support of stronger incentives to protect rural historic buildings. He said that grants and tax credits should encourage adaptive reuse over demolition. In his talks, he often used detailed case studies from his work with nonprofits to show how each barn or mill he saved helped preserve cultural history and keep economies going. He stood in a hearing room in Washington, D.C., one time holding a piece of hand-hewn heartwood that he had taken from a tobacco barn that had been condemned. He talked about how each splinter held decades of community stories that would be lost without policy guarantees. Lawmakers, many of whom didn't know much about working with wood, leaned forward and looked at the physical object in his hand with great interest. Even with these high-profile events, Johnny kept his focus on his work and his community. He started the Barnwood Builders Masonry and Timber Conference, which is held every year at his silo lab and brings together masons, timber builders, historians, and architects for a few days of talks. The theme of each year was an under-resourced custom. For example, one year the theme was earth-fast log construction in pioneer settlements, and the next year it was the details of barn-raising rituals that bring communities together. People who were there looked around his workshop, listened to talks on testing for moisture content, and worked together in hands-on workshops. The conference went from a small gathering of 50 people in Johnny's hometown to an international event with hundreds of people. It was made possible by small donations from toolmakers and heritage groups who supported Johnny's beliefs. People who went to Johnny's classes were talking about how his friendly teaching style and support for policy made them want to start their own preservation projects back home on social media. Of course, not every step forward was easy. When a big museum asked him to put together an exhibit of salvaged wood, he found that the curators wanted to show clean cross-sections instead of raw, weathered beams. He disagreed, saying that the nail holes, lichen spots, and uneven grain that came with age were an important part of each piece's story. The argument got worse and ended up in the museum's office, where Johnny gave an eloquent speech about how important it is to respect the marks of history instead of cleaning them up to make them look better. He said he would quit completely if the exhibit design didn't accept raw authenticity. The museum finally gave in and made a mixed media show with recordings of oral histories and polished cross-sections of old timbers that had not been touched. The exhibit was a big hit at the museum and showed how to balance the needs of the curators with the needs of the history. At the same time, Johnny was having a hard time with how digital material was changing. Now, his timber revival channel had to deal with competition from influencers who promoted 1-hour barn rebuilds and quick-fix salvage hacks that skipped important structural and moisture checks. Instead of starting a fight, Johnny made it even more of a team effort by having other craftsmen and researchers on his show to talk about the problems with the rapid build culture and stress the science behind long-term preservation. He made short films that compared real timber restoration with rushed barn flip experiments. The documentaries told stories of buildings that failed because builders forgot to do important things. These episodes went viral, which started discussions in the industry about the right way to restore material for broadcast. Johnny set himself up as a bridge between speed-hungry fans and professionals who care about substance by using calm conversation instead of conflict. As 2023 came to an end, Johnny's trip came full circle. He spoke to a large crowd at the opening of the Timber Arts Museum and Training Center, which is housed in a renovated textile mill that he helped turn into an interactive heritage site. The museum's huge atrium had beams hanging from the ceiling that came from a partially hidden Appalachian grist mill. Downstairs, trainees were carving dovetail joints under tall factory windows. He saw happy faces of students, volunteers, politicians, and co-workers and knew that his path from being a carpenter at Barnwood Builders to a global guardian of wood traditions was based on strong beliefs that would not change. He told the people there that every project, whether it's for network TV or a community hall in the middle of nowhere, needs patience, respect, and a deep interest in the stories that wood holds. That message, not his fame or numbers, showed what really happened to Johnny Jett. He became a guardian not only of barns, but also of craftsmanship, history, and the lasting legacy that lives on wherever old wood is used in new ways. Johnny's influence went beyond the silo lab and into education, charity, and politics. He turned a one-man workshop into a movement for mindful restoration. After opening the Timber Arts Museum, he worked with the forestry school at Marshall University to make a semester-long course in timber conservation studies. Students went to Johnny's studio to do hands-on projects and then came back to campus to look at how adaptive reuse and fresh harvests affect the environment. There were lessons in the program on monitoring moisture, analyzing old paint, and ethical sourcing. 20 college students worked in rural West Virginia each summer to make a database of endangered barns. They added photos, floor plans, and status reports to the National Barnwood Database, which is an open-access archive that lists thousands of buildings. Volunteers sent in more than 1,000 comments over the course of 6 months, which helped guide preservation efforts across the country. Johnny started weekly live-streamed fireside chats to go along with his work with academics. Every Thursday night, he lit a wood stove in the silo lab and answered questions from viewers in real time. The talks covered a wide range of subjects, from the chemistry of tannins in oak that is over 100 years old to the morality of selling used pine at craft furniture markets. Architectural historians, chemists checking lead paint flakes, and other woodworkers showing off Japanese joinery were some of the guest experts. These uncut talks drew a lot of people and showed how much he believed that open communication leads to good leadership. He set up a moderated Q&A system that put constructive activity ahead of trolling. This is now being studied by digital community managers who work with young people as mentors. Johnny's charitable idea came to life in the form of the Wood Heritage Fellowship, a competition grant that gives under 40 citizen scientists and artisans startup money. Fellows took care of a lot of different things, from a Quaker meeting house in Ohio to a weaving workshop in Kentucky that reused pattern boards. Each fellow stayed at the silo lab for 1 month and showed off their work to the public at the end. The fellowship helped him connect with more professionals in different restoration areas and gave a voice to people who hadn't been heard before. People who got it said it was a career-defining chance that helped them go from being heritage enthusiasts to working as experts. Expansion did, of course, bring critics. Late in 2022, traditional conservators said Johnny was overenthusiastic when he used modern epoxies to strengthen split beams. At a national conference on preservation, an expert questioned his methods, which led to a debate that was written up in a peer-reviewed magazine. In response, Johnny put together a technical committee to test different adhesives and published open-source white papers on how well they would work in the long run. These tough side-by-side tests brought together traditional craft and modern material science. They were used to guide both academic study and nonprofit projects. In Pendleton County, tourism went through the roof after his foreign series brought in weekend visitors eager to check out the silo lab. Businesses were happy that their heirlooms were full and their menus had grown, but some local craftsmen were worried that tourism would make regional customs less important. To fix this, Johnny started the Pendleton Artisan Guild, which helps local blacksmiths and woodworkers improve their skills and sell their products for free. Meetings every 3 months in a remodeled heritage hall made sure that the community as a whole, not just his own businesses, benefited from the economy. Johnny quietly set goals for 2024 as 2023 came to a close. These goals included the official opening of the Timber Arts Museum, the publication of his field guide Reclaimed Wisdom, the growth of the Wood Heritage Fellowship into Latin America, and the start of a second season of Beyond the Barn in New Zealand. But his main beliefs haven't changed. He believes in slowly honoring material history, teaching the next generation, and respecting the stories that wood holds. He says this a lot: restoration isn't about getting the best reveal as quickly as possible, it's about honoring the slow dance between human hands and the ancient rhythms of wood. Early in 2024, Johnny's hard work won him the Lifetime Craftsman Award from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. This is an honor that is usually given to academics. In his acceptance speech, he talked about how curious his trainees were and how each reclaimed beam held a story. He reminded the crowd that real preservation happens when people are interested in the wood's long history. As spring came to Appalachia, Johnny went back to the roots of his calling and spent the early hours of the morning measuring down trees against growth rings that were hundreds of years old. His focus had changed from TV highlights to a broader responsibility for material heritage. Each beam that was reused became a symbol of the region's strength and a warning that every building has a story hidden inside it. This deeper vision led him on the last part of his trip, which went beyond fame and focused on the lasting effects of careful, well-thought-out craftsmanship. In practice, he added an annual residency for preservation journalists to the Silo Labs Fellowship program. This made sure that the stories of saved barns reached people outside of craft groups and policy forums. His field guide, Reclaimed Wisdom, was so popular that it went into a second printing just a few months after it came out. People loved it for both its detailed sketches and its first-person thoughts on how tools and wood work together. Its case studies were used in graduate classes on ecology, cultural geography, and rural economics at universities all over North America. Digital scans of his hand-drawn joinery plans could be used in interactive museum displays from Nova Scotia to New Zealand thanks to licensing agreements. This closed the loop on his influence around the world. As students moved 3D models of dovetailed corner posts around, they got to experience for themselves the hands-on lessons Johnny had recorded in his slowest classes. On the other hand, the non-profit Barnwood Heritage Trust celebrated its 10th anniversary by bringing together leaders from Europe, Asia, and Latin America for a global meeting in Copenhagen. Johnny's keynote, which he gave via live video link from the Silo Lab, was a mix of personal stories about the West Virginia barns that shaped his career and calls for people from all over the world to work together on the best ways to recover wood. He talked about a new website called TimberShare that will let people all over the world report on the state of endangered buildings. Within weeks, architects in Japan shared information about Kura warehouses and heritage groups in Sweden shared plans for stave churches. Together, they created a live online atlas of old wood architecture that shows how much he believed in community-led preservation. Back in Pendleton County, Johnny was in charge of finishing up the Timber Arts Museum's interactive wing. People could use augmented reality headsets to see old barns being rebuilt one step at a time. He talked with his apprentices about the first frame of his grain silo studio. He was amazed at how that simple conversion had turned into a center for thoughtful restoration around the world. As the last plaque was put on by volunteers honoring local craftspeople whose names didn't usually make the news, Johnny understood that the museum was more than just a place to store things, it was a beacon calling people and scholars to join the slow, careful art of timber revival. When it came to his personal life, he found a rhythm of quiet happiness. The family held workshops on the weekends in a restored millworker's cabin that he built for his kids. He shared the ideas that had guided his work there, surrounded by the sound of wood stoves and folding rulers. These ideas were curiosity before efficiency, respect before showmanship, and patience before promise. Each lesson reminded him of the lessons his grandfather taught him in the barn and the hundreds of builders he had taught in the Silo Lab. He understood that stewardship wasn't just about saving buildings, it was also about training the next generation of guardians as he watched little hands trace the grain on old boards. In the future, Johnny wants to write down his experiences in an oral history series that also includes the words of longtime apprentices and community elders. He wants to set up a decentralized network of microlabs, which are small studios like the Silo Lab, so that artists can learn without having to come to him. These local hubs will help build strong economies and cultural understanding, showing that respect for used wood doesn't have to be limited to remote valleys. In the end, what started as a quiet skill on a DIY show turned into a worldwide movement. It was the patience of a single craftsman who showed us that real preservation doesn't come from making headlines, but from the steady work of hearts and hands working together for a shared goal.